pyramids, they are easy to build. Anyone can pile up rocks, but massive stones, a whole nother story. Today on the show, the boys will discuss why megalithic sites are spaced out all over the world, all seemingly created around the same era. Intricately fashioned and strategically placed, these structures vary in size and shape, but all seem to serve the same general purpose. Who built them? Where did they come from? Where did they go? How did they erect such massive structures with no evidence of any habitation? Let's find out. Welcome to Bermuda Boys.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show that we have that is really awesome. I had an intro, but I lost it. We lost the internet when we first started recording, so it kind of threw us for a loop here, and threw me for a loop, and I was all prepared, but now I'm all screwed up. But whatever. Anyway, the show must go on. We're still here. I'm Jack.
And I'm Mike.
And we're the Bermuda Boys. So thank you for joining us again for another great, informational, awesome episode of our show. We're going to be kind of sticking with the same thing that we've been sticking with for quite some time now. This is our 6th episode, and we're going to just keep on rolling with this because it's such an amazing topic, and it's such an just like deep topic that so much to just talk about with it. And we've come up with something else. Well, I say we, but I mean Mike actually came up with something else for this that is, I don't know, I think it's going to be really mind-blowing what we're going to do here today. I don't know.
I hope so.
Maybe I'm setting us up a little too high, but I don't know. I think we're going to really crack some eggs and make an omelet. I don't know where I'm going with this. But what are we talking about, Mike?
We're going to talk about the Stone Age megalithic structures.
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know of Stonehenge.
Okay, Stonehenge is the big famous one. Yep.
Yeah. And I think pretty much everybody knows about Stonehenge as well.
Yeah.
And I've always been fascinated ever since I was, I don't know, able to look at pictures and see pictures of Stonehenge back when I was, a wee little lad many years ago. And I'm still fascinated today by these structures. But Stonehenge always seems to be the one that just really, it's always put right front and center for pretty much everybody. Everybody knows about Stonehenge. And
yeah, it's riveting. It's one of the biggest ones, too, or the biggest henge, I think.
I think it might be. I mean, there's a lot of just like single, like there's that one in France, I believe, that's just a whole bunch of just standing stones that are all lined up in rows. That one is pretty impressive. But yeah, I think Stonehenge, yeah, it is the biggest one. It's definitely the most popular one. Mm-hmm. But still, a whole lot of mystery surrounds it. Like they kind of know basically just basic things about it. Like they know where the stone possibly comes from, but they have no idea how it was built, who built it. They have a general idea of why it was built, but they still have no, definitive answers, and we probably never will. And that's one of the great things about these mysteries is that it's always going to be a mystery. No matter what. I mean, you can speculate all you want. That's what we're going to do because we're good at that.
Yep.
But, man, yeah, I'm stoked about this. Like, I think this is going to be fun. But there's more than just Stonehenge. Yeah.
Actually, quite a lot more. So I think probably we should start with a quick word like as to what, because I just said two big words that are not exactly English. Megalith, which comes from Greco-Roman. It means large stone, lithos
Yeah.
is stone.
Alright, yeah. Makes sense.
And not to be confused with the time period in which most of them were constructed, which was the Neolithic, which is again, like I said, a period of time, not a structure itself. Neolithic being, of course, from the neo, meaning new, lithos, meaning stone. New Stone Age, which occurred between the Paleolithic and the first civilization in 4,500 BC, or roughly thereabouts.
Right.
So this is a time before known civilization, at least as we understand civilization these days, and still Stone Age, but new Stone Age. What that really means is there's just some cultural innovations, cultural changes. People started growing grains and keeping domestic animals like sheep and cattle, as opposed to the Paleolithic when people lived by hunting wild animals and gathering wild fruits and plants.
Yeah. So to kind of like put some of this into perspective, so like we tend to associate the birth of civilization with the Mesopotamian cultures, like the Sumerian, for example. I think is probably what we would consider the first recognized civilization. I'm not exactly sure offhand when the Sumerians first came around, but I'm assuming it was around about what, like 6,000 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, about 6,500 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, see,
Roughly.
you're on top of this. So that is a pretty massive time frame right there, from where the first civilization first sprouted up to where we are now. That's a huge span of years. Now, when were these henges built?
Ooh, so they were built between 12,000 years ago and well, some of them were still built in the time of civilization, but of course outside of Sumeria and other civilized areas. So some of them go all the way up into the Bronze Age, especially when you're talking about the periphery of Europe, like Ireland and Scandinavia and stuff. But yeah, so mostly all of them were built between 12,000 years ago and 6,000 years ago, roughly.
All right. So from when the first ones were built, and like I was saying, I'm putting this into perspective here, 12,000 years ago. And then the Sumerian culture emerging onto the scene 6,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So almost the same amount of time in between when these first monolithic structures and cultures started to show up to the Sumerian culture as there is to the Sumerian culture to us now.
Mm-hmm.
That is a massive, massive time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, I don't know about most people, but I can't even fathom the amount of time in between us and the Sumerians. So this is double that. And we've got these cultures out there building these huge structures that defy, like, all known laws of science at the time. I mean, we're talking, like, blocks of stone that weigh in the tons.
Mm-hmm.
Erected.
So at Stonehenge, you mentioned Stonehenge earlier. The blue stones, that's the little tiny stones in the outer edge of the circle, I believe it is. Those are 2 tons a piece. That's like roughly a pickup size, and those are the tiny stones. The Sarsen ones, I don't even remember the number off the top of my head.
Yeah, they're huge.
They're massive.
Now I've seen pictures of Stonehenge. I've never actually seen it in person. I would love to someday. But from what I can see in the pictures, I mean, you've got stones ranging in size from, like, yeah, a small car up to the size of, like, a school bus. And then not to mention the fact that not only are they stood them upright, they then took one that's the same size and stacked it on top of the 2 that they stood upright.
Uh-huh.
how? How? And we look at it now with like our engineering brains and the way that we look at construction these days, and we will think, well, cranes, obviously, we can lift huge I-beams up and build these skyscrapers that are massive and tall and everything. But back then, they didn't have that type of ability. Block and tackle, they just had the basic things like an inclined plane was pretty much all they really had to work with. They didn't even have the freaking wheel, for Christ's sake. So it amazes me. So the Sumerian culture and all subsequent cultures after that all had, these grand structures that they built too, but they also had the civilization to back it up. They had the manpower, they had the know-how, they had the engineering mind strength to be able to build these things. But we don't know anything about these cultures that built these monoliths. So,
point of clarification: megalith.
Megalith.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, a monolith would be a single stone. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. A megalith would be multiple stones. Okay. Yeah. I'm learning. It's a simple slip. Everybody does it.
Yep.
Except for you, because you know more about this than me. But I'm just
I'm sure I'll slip up myself. So another note of wording: Stonehenge. We think of it as the name of the place. A hinge is a circle. It just means stone circle.
Yeah.
There's many other hinges all throughout Britain. I think even Western France has, like you were saying, some. There's a lot of circular megalithic monuments where they've taken taken stones from somewhere else, dragged them, because, like you said, they don't have the wheel, dragged them across the landscape, stood them upright in a circle, and with varying degrees of success with the circle, but they're all a lot closer than, like, you would imagine for just, some people out there trying for a series of weekend projects or something between, planting and plowing and harvesting and all of that. So some of the things that we would need nowadays, I think, to get some of the precision, like the precision of the circle and the shape and the alignment, because a lot of them have alignment to either the sun or some other astral body, and usually when we do that, we have precision measuring tools so that we can survey the landscape, get some leveling done, and measure out these precise angles and arcs for circles and things like that. I'm not aware that any of that came about. There's no archaeological evidence of any kind of precision measuring tools, no surveyor's chains or anything like that. I've not found any sort of evidence of that sort of thing beyond somebody's speculation that you find. You can always find somebody on the internet speculating, which is what we're doing.
Yeah, we're doing the same right now.
Yeah.
But what about, like, tools? I mean, have they even found any, like, say, even tools around these sites?
See, that's the thing. They would be stone tools. So they would look essentially like the stones around them.
Yeah,
that's the other thing, is those sarsen stones. That's a very hard stone. So we're talking, they took a stone that was roughly that shape, but then they sat there and they pounded it with granite or basalt or something for a long enough time that they chipped and pecked away until they had achieved the shape they wanted. That is massive. Oh, and then the other thing too, usually to plan and lead these sorts of things, you need some sort of writing, some sort of ability to draw up, engineering blueprints. You need to draw up plans. There's no evidence of writing before civilization.
No.
Not definitive evidence of writing.
And like we've touched on before, when we were talking about, like, Göbekli Tepe out there in Turkey, the same situation. You need some sort of form of a governmental system. You need. I mean, we're assuming that this wasn't just a group of like 5 guys that got bored over the course of like, 3 decades or something. We're assuming that's not the case. I mean, there's no possible way that they could have done that in their lifetime. This had to have taken a serious amount of time and a serious amount of manpower. So you need food to, supply these people with food, tools, a place to live. You need a whole societal structure in order to do something this grandiose. And there's no evidence of that around any of these sites.
On that point, what's wild is around Stonehenge itself, there was a town that was built up, but there is no evidence anywhere nearby of them growing grain. They found like food storage pits where they were storing grain, so these guys must have been bringing it in from somewhere else, which is yet another monumental task of organization and leadership.
Yeah, we're talking trade routes. We're talking a type of civilization that we've never encountered before on the planet until the Sumerians showed up.
Yeah.
And we have no history of it whatsoever aside from these giant megaliths that they've left behind. And with every mystery we discover, we just pile like 2 or 3 more on top of it.
Yep.
And it's just a growing rabbit hole of something that's never ever going to be solved unless somebody can go back in time and ask. But even then, we don't know what their language was.
If I could be that guy that goes back in time, I'll tell you what, I'd jump at that chance.
Yeah, you get some sort of strange Stone Age disease or something, and then
probably. I have dreamed about going back to the Neolithic probably since I think about high school. Like, what did these? They left no writing. There's no writing. There's no record other than these huge megaliths everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh man, what must life have been like for them?
Cold. Because that is another fact that I'm going to bring up is that around about the time where these megaliths first started appearing, the Earth was coming out of a major ice age. Still at this point in time, I forget what it was called, like the Younger Dryas or something.
Oh yeah,
like that.
Younger Dryas, yeah.
Yeah, age, and the areas where these megaliths, a lot of them were built, especially the European ones. We picture these Stone Age people as being, covered in animal furs and working with stone tools, like, living in caves, things like that. That's how we picture them. That's how we're taught to picture them. But it turns out they're actually fairly sophisticated and extremely sophisticated by even modern day standards with their, ability to track celestial bodies and align their hinges or their regular monolith stones as well in some sort of astronomical manner. And so they had to have a very good knowledge of what was going on with the planet and with the entire solar system and the universe, the known universe to them, for that matter. And also these, uneducated Stone Age people, as we like to portray them, would have known that the Earth was round. Hence the reason why they're building circular structures. So therefore, they're already smarter than a good 20% of the internet out there that thinks the world is still flat. So, you got to give them credit where credit's due. They not only figured out a way to erect these massive structures with these massive blocks that we have no idea how they moved, but they arranged them in such a way that even now, millennia later, they still line up with the celestial bodies that they're supposed to, with the sun, the moon, everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
This many millennia later, which we all know the Earth tilts and wobbles around,
Mm-hmm.
things are going to change. Well, they probably did over the years, but then it's come back. They knew, they factored that kind of stuff in. It still lines up.
Yeah, so there's due to fuck axial precession, I think it's called. The equator moves around, so the equator actually was, I believe it was further north at the time. So northern Africa, where the Sahara would be, would have been a lot more like the Amazon, the Congo, a lot more
Yeah.
lush, and these glaciers would have receded post haste out of Europe, because that would be essentially, Europe would be, more of a grassland, like the, I don't know, like Mongolia or the Gobi Desert
Yeah,
or
like
something.
the steppe.
Yeah, yeah. So it would have been a lot warmer of a climate. So you've got the glaciers pulling out, things warming up, and everyone is just like, suddenly they're experimenting with agriculture, planting seeds, saving some of the grass seeds they like to eat to plant the next year, and doing whatever they're doing with these monuments. But hey, to speak to how very much they aren't cave dwelling, skin wearing mammoth hunters. People in the Neolithic had woolen woven cloth that they could wear, so clothing like us. They had pottery, so they could cook in dishes and eat out of dishes like we do. They had just switched from a flint knapping technique to a polished stone technique. So all of their tools, their axes, their knives, they were highly polished and smooth rather than just being chipped and flaked out of flint and other chert and other stones like that. These guys are, I mean, a polished stone axe versus just chipping the flint into a usable axe in few minutes, an hour, whatever. A polished stone axe took many hours to do. You're sitting there with a harder stone, and you're getting the piece you're working wet, and then rubbing it on that stone until it's smooth and axe shaped. And if you want to look up some of these axes, man, they're beautiful. They're like, I think they're called boat axes or battle axes. If you look them up, these beautiful polished stone Neolithic axes. The pottery from that time period is quite beautiful. You can look up like Trypillian or Vinca culture pottery from Eastern Europe. Fucking amazing, nice designs. I would say the Vinca pottery specifically reminds me a lot of Attic Greek ware, like Attic red pottery. The famous, if you watch the cartoon Hercules, the red vases with the people and everything on them.
And, they tell a story on them.
Yeah.
So you're describing people that are much more intelligent, much more advanced, with a much more defined sense of culture than what we would have pictured as a whole of people at that time. And like I've never really pictured them with, like, when like I said, when I think of the Stone Age, like most people, I'm thinking, yeah, they got some stone tools. They got their stick attached to a rock, and it's tied on there with some twine that they made out of I don't know, flax or something like that, and just tied it on there, and they're out there cutting down trees and building these just basic structures to live in. But they weren't. They were so much more advanced than that. I mean,
yeah. So some of these people's towns and houses, well, they'd be more of villages because, again, pretty low population. I think around that time, the entire population of Europe was like 100,000 or something like that. I don't remember. But it's pretty low population. But if you look at like, the Vinca, Starchevo-Caros cultures complex, their cities were cities. I mean, they were houses all together in rows together, ladders going into the upper story ones and things like this. You could go to it's linear pottery people from Central Europe, and they had freaking thatch roofed houses made out of beams and logs, and I mean something you could see in, like, 17th century Europe, 17th century America,
Yeah. Yeah. And like, obviously they're doing a whole lot more than that. I mean, so you described the entire population of Europe at that point in time being estimated to be around about 100,000. How long did it take them to build the pyramids, and how many people were there for that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, in the amount of time that it took them to build just the pyramids of Giza, was at least a lifetime for most people.
A few decades, something like that.
Yeah, and also took probably around about 100,000 people to do so.
Yeah.
And we're talking smaller blocks than what a lot of these megaliths are built out of.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking less travel distance, more people, and still about the same amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we all know, like Daniel so politely put at the beginning of the show, anybody can build a pyramid. It's just the easiest way to stack blocks.
Mm.
You're just, piling them up until they reach a point. Well, these Stone Age culture that you're talking about had built these, very, very intricately designed and I don't know what the word I'm looking for here is. It's not I don't know. Well, they were just they built it good, and
Mm-hmm.
and with lining up with celestial bodies and whatnot, showing what seasons there were. So they're also showing not only that they have a scientific knowledge of what's going on in the world around them, they're also showing what would be the first signs of any sort of organized religion. So
yes,
which is one of the biggest prerequisites for civilization is if you're going to have any sort of civilization, you need one of two things, either a religion or a code of laws. And a religion and code of laws, they can kind of interchange here and there to being kind of the same thing. So you have these people there building these structures, and it's for a certain purpose. So you're going to have at least the elite or the upper class of these people, the more intelligent of them, have the idea and design of why they're building this. And then you have the layperson builder that's going to be there, but you need to control them, and you need to give them some sort of spurn for this, some sort of goal to be able to get this done. And it can't just be, we'll kill your family or something if you don't build this. 'Cause I don't think that was the case.
Oh, yeah. So remarkably, most of the Neolithic leaves no signs of human conflict, murder, war, battle. There's not much evidence of violence. There's a couple of notable exceptions, but archaeologically, the story plays out that across all of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, there is not much. There's very little violence. So, yeah, nobody's using any kind of threat of, oh, we'll just invade and kill all your people if you don't do this,
Yeah. So, okay. And that brings me to the point that you proposed to me when we first talked about doing this episode, was that kind of brings up the whole thought of, well, we all know how different groups of humans interact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
we get violent.
Mm-hmm.
My neighbor decided he was going to play some loud music. Cool. Anyway, we
We
get
get
violent. And we get angry with people that we don't like that are near us, that aren't the same as us. So this kind of implies not only are these structures all over the place, I mean, a huge swath of area. And we're talking, like you said, Europe, the Middle East, North Africa. There's even some all the way out in like Asia. And there's some here in North America as well, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. But it goes to show that since all of these were built and there's no signs of warfare or anything going on, that this must have been all the same people, or at least some sort of relative of these same people, either passed down through time, or it was just what we're talking isn't just a widespread just group of nomadic people. We're talking an actual coordinated civilization over a huge expanse of land.
You would think that the hunter-gatherer type people who are just living off of the landscape and the wild plants would be kind of excluded out of this. Interestingly enough, Göbekli Tepe, one of the earliest megalithic structures, was built by hunter-gatherers. So they were having to stash up extra beef jerky or whatever it was. I guess mammoth jerky or whatever it is. They'd have to be stashing up extra to go spend time that they could be hunting, gathering, surviving, or resting if they've successfully survived for a while, to go build this crazy, huge, complex structure like Göbekli Tepe. Britain also has some similar things. So there was the earliest hinges and megalithic structures that came up in Britain were actually done before agriculture was introduced there. They had just barely started adopting the idea of keeping sheep or maybe goats, some other kind of small pastoral animal. And they were still doing this. So that means in between taking care of their sheep every day, they were finding time to drag some of the smaller stones, because early on, you start with the smaller stones. The earlier you go back in the Neolithic, further you go back in the Neolithic. So these guys are dragging 2-ton stones in their free time between watching their sheep, Yeah.
Which is, I don't know. It's like it kind of, it brings up two theories. You either got these people that were doing this in their spare time, or you have an outlying civilization that's using this area as some form of outpost or religious area, religious center that they come to from wherever they are, like a pilgrimage site.
Yep.
So say this civilization occurred somewhere further south in Europe, like maybe the south of France or something, where it was a little bit warmer, an area that was able to produce more food, and it was more volatile for human production.
Viable.
And these people
viable.
would then,
Volatile means chaotic.
yeah, yes, you're right, viable. My brain is still kind of fried from this whole, going sober thing. So I was like, I'm going to mess up shit a lot.
That's all good.
But I'm working on it. I know you feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, viable. Thank you very much. So they had to produce these resources somewhere else from where,
and that would
be.
That would definitely be borne out again. I'm going to go back to the British Isles a lot because it's my favorite part of the Neolithic. But the Ness of Brodgar and Skara Brae are two places in northern Scotland. Like, people hardly live there now.
And if they do, they don't want to. Yeah.
They have this huge stone circle there. They have a huge tumulus, which is a big, huge earthen mound built around what's called a cyst, which is megalithic stones that make up like a room. and then they cover it all over with earth. They got this way up there. So somebody is having to come out there to build it from somewhere else where they live 100%.
Yeah. So, I mean, that pretty much just goes to show. I mean, obviously, they had the will and they had the means. Mm-hmm. But they also needed a whole lot of many other things. Mm-hmm. They needed a workforce. They needed a code of laws. They needed a form and structure of government. And they needed materials to do this. This was a grand undertaking in order to build any of these. Even if you're just erecting just a monolith, just one stone straight up, and you're dragging it from miles away, that's going to take more than a handful of people to do. It's going to be coordinated. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we associate with the form of civilization with the Sumerians. People finally grouping together because of the ability to grow food.
Notably a civilization that did not leave any megalithic structures behind.
Yeah. And so we have a literal ton of evidence of a civilization that was probably way more advanced than some of the actual known civilizations that we know of, almost 6,000 years after them. Mm-hmm. So, this is a mind-blowing thing, because it kind of goes back to what we've talked about before. All of these civilizations that we know of now as actual civilizations showed up after some sort of great catastrophe. And like we've talked before, what came before them? Well, it was just hunter-gatherer type people. Well, this is evidence, it's pretty damning evidence, if you ask me, that there was an entire civilization that came before. So it does kind of tie into the whole Atlantis thing and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Maybe, and I'm just throwing this out there, but maybe there was a place such as Atlantis, and these people did just branch out and build these structures around. But then the ones that were built, they would just return back to, what would be Atlantis. And then when that was destroyed, all these structures were still left out there. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But their civilization where they're from is gone, and we have no evidence of it.
Yeah. So I love that we're back to Atlantis. I thought that was the direction you were going, and I was kind of holding back because I wanted to burst. Do you want to talk about Atlantis?
I know how excited you get about that.
Oh, yeah. So
and I love it.
That is one of the one of the theories that I've come across, that someone had to come along and teach these guys, kind of like we talked about in our Great Flood and Atlantis episode, the fire bringers or the culture bringers. Someone was coming along and bringing these methods, these tools. The legends about Stonehenge say that ancient druids in the past used magic to build it for sun worship. Well, at the time when, in the 1800s, when someone recorded that legend, they're like, it's not for sun worship, of course. But more recently, actual archaeologists and anthropologists and whatnot have checked it out, and it does align with the rising sun on the winter solstice. If you're gathering for the rising sun on the shortest day of the year, I bet that would look like sun worship. So, who were these ancient druids that brought this ability? One legend about Stonehenge says that Merlin, who is a famous wizard from Arthurian legend. I got to bring Arthurian legend into the show sometime. I'd love to talk about that, but I'm digressing.
Yeah, so that's another great mystery we can talk about.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
So Merlin is thought to have floated the stones using magic as if they were weightless through the air to build Stonehenge. Now, another one saying, okay, earlier we talked about Göbekli Tepe. It is the oldest, but other than Göbekli Tepe, the oldest stone megalithic structures are actually from North Africa, what's now the Sahara. They go back about 10,000 BC, I think, is when they first started doing that. And the most common ones are actually, thank you, Daniel, pyramid-shaped or ziggurat-shaped. They're called bazinas. But the other structures are more dolmen-shaped. They're called idebnon. Dolmens are like a little table. It's got 3 upright stones and then 1 flat big stone sitting across the top.
Yeah.
And they're usually associated with burials. One or several important people buried underneath of them. And they, like I said, they started in 10,000 BC. And if you remember back to when we talked about Atlantis, I proposed the Eye of Africa as one of the possible locations. That is in the Western Sahara.
Yeah. And as you had mentioned earlier, the Saharan Desert wasn't always a desert.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually, like you had mentioned before also, there was a shift in the Earth's axis around about 5,400 years ago, which caused the desertification
Mm-hmm.
of the Saharan Desert. Before that, it was a much wetter place. Like you said, it was like a rainforest.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been a much more,
A lot better, a lot more river valleys, a lot more
Yeah.
rich, loamy soil. Think about like around
Easier
the
for
Nile.
agriculture.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect for agriculture. And actually, archaeologists have found out in the Sahara, I mean, not a lot of archaeology is done out there, but the stuff that has been done, they'll find stuff like the local people around this time, like 10,000 years ago and whatnot in the Neolithic, experimenting with their local grains, their local wild grasses, to see if they could domesticate them. Some of them were abandoned when they couldn't cross-pollinate them to get big enough grains and whatnot, sort of things like that. But same with the local wildlife. There was brief experiments for, a couple hundred, 1,000 years, whatever, of trying to domesticate various local wild sheep, wild cattle, things like this, that would later, the climate would change a little bit, or the people would move on and they'd abandon the trial. Whereas the Middle Eastern and European cultural, Neolithic cultural, they call it the Neolithic package, basically. It's several specific types of wheat and barley that were specifically original to, I believe, Syria or Lebanon, maybe. And they were domesticated by a culture called the Natufian culture in the very late Paleolithic. And then their neighbors started adopting those same grains, and the goats and sheep started being domesticated, and they would trade them on to the next cultures. And so the Neolithic package that spread throughout Europe was a package of these Natufian grains and sheep and goats, not local wild grains and local wild sheep and goats. Whereas in North Africa, in the Sahara, during this greening period, they were experimenting with their own shit. So it could possibly be, and this is kind of a personal conjecture on my part, it could possibly be that the Natufians from the Middle East saw these North Africans doing it somehow. Maybe someone traveled there, someone took their dugout canoe, wound up in Africa, and saw these guys experimenting with, if we save these grass seeds till next year, we can plant them and have plenty of food. We don't have to wander. If we save this goat in a pen, she'll have babies, and we'll have goats and milk and meat, and we don't have to go out hunting. And then came back home and did the same thing, and it just kind of caught on and spread. But it's unfortunate because the Green Sahara didn't get the opportunity to keep trying because of the desertification.
Yeah, that's a hard word, isn't it?
It is.
Desertification, I guess.
Yeah, so that kind of killed a lot of their experiments and killed a lot of their successes as well, because like I said, they had a flourishing culture that was building these megaliths, these Idebnon, into actually all the way down into 1,500 years ago. They kept
Yeah.
building these things, of course, on the further and further and further onto the periphery, and with smaller and smaller stones. There's no Bedouins or Berbers, or Tuaregs that are going out into the desert dragging huge stones with their camels these days.
No.
But they will still build these monuments out of stone. They're just normal sized stones. But so it does seem to me that it originated in North Africa, and that brings it all back to Atlantis and the Eye of Africa. That what was it called? The Richat structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, as you've described, and I hope our listeners have gone out there and actually looked at a picture of this thing, because the way that Atlantis is described is exactly what this looks like. And there is no possible way that anybody could have just walked up on this. I mean, this is a massive area of the Saharan desert. There's no way they just walked up on it and they were like, hey, this gives me an idea for this city that I'm going to make up. Because you pretty much have to see it from space or from an extreme altitude to be able to see the concentric rings and everything like that that surround this.
Now, could it have been possibly seen from the Atlas Mountains? I know the Romans were up in the Atlas Mountains for a while. Or is it too far away?
I think it would be too far away, and also just because of perspective, you wouldn't be able to see it.
Oh, okay.
In the direct way that you would be able to see and describe exactly how Atlantis is described in the shape of this structure.
Yeah, with the concentric rings and then the channel that goes out all the way to the sea. Yeah.
And modern science tells us that it is a volcanic structure, but I don't know. I've seen geologically made things, and I've seen man-made things, and you can usually tell the difference.
Yeah.
Symmetry is one thing, aside from like fractals, that doesn't really necessarily occur in nature. You look at, especially with geology and mineralogy and things like that, with the way that geology works, say a volcano, okay, you're not going to get that symmetry that this thing has. It clearly looks man-made to me. And if it was man-made, that would put it thousands of years prior.
Before
to
civilization.
anything that we have.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only that, they're building it in a ring. And what else do they build in rings?
Stonehenge.
All their henges that they built around there.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't know, it's mind-blowing.
Well, here's another interesting aspect about their culture is all across this vast landscape we've talked about where these stone megalithic structures are, they seem to venerate, I hesitate to say worship, because worship has associated rituals and ceremonies and stuff like that. So it's hard to tell that from a statue or a sculpture or a figurine, But these figurines of mother goddesses are found everywhere. There is, almost to the exclusion of any other human figure, any other human representation whatsoever, they are all these either pregnant or just regular mother figures, figurines of women who are ample, and they seem to...
Ample indeed, I've seen these.
Yeah, so a good... The stereotypical one is the Venus of Willendorf. If you want to go look that, Google image search Venus of Willendorf, and
we're talking thick.
Yes. Yeah. And so these are found all over this cultural landscape. They seem to indicate some sort of fertility, some sort of nurturing. They have plenty of motherliness to go around. So this culture is often traditionally associated with mother goddess worship. So if you ever get into Maria Gimbutas is a big archaeologist, I believe she is, on this time period. She calls it the Gravettian, although that's a bit of a overgeneralization. But it works for her purposes because she's talking about generally the whole cultural space, archaeological landscape and the cultural similarities across the time. So it works for us. This kind of belief in a warm, nurturing, embracing mother who has to do with fertility, as of course they've just started doing agriculture. You need to plant a seed in the ground, you need it to grow, right? Whereas before that, you would probably have to look to, I would imagine, the moon rather than the earth, because, you need the light of the moon for successful hunts. It's going to be hard to hunt in the new moon without flashlights and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So
not many animals move during that time anyway, because they can't see either.
Mm-hmm.
So
we see this transition to a never before seen mother goddess, and it makes me wonder if the okay, this is where we get a little dicey. I'm going back into conjecture. I don't think that the megalithic structures have much to do with the mother goddess. I actually think they have more to do with the sky. So we've talked about their celestial alignments, right? And in at least in mythology that has survived to us, like the Greeks and the Norse and the Mesopotamians and stuff, the sky is usually associated with a sky father. But a lot of megalithic structures do include earth, like entombment, something like returning to the embrace of your mother after death. So I mentioned cysts earlier. Many cysts started out as a megalithic standing stone structure. It's a box. It's a stone box, basically, made out of huge, multi-ton stones. But then later, archaeologists will dig through and date this stuff, and they'll find that they weren't actually covered over with earth until later. So it could have been a coming in of this transition I was speaking about to this mother goddess worship. I'm not sure on that. It's kind of conjecture on my part. But so you've got these type of tombs that'll show up. They're called passage. There's a type called passage tombs, and there's a type called chambered tombs, and they are a little bit later, and they are entirely built of earth. Sometimes they don't have any megalithic structure at all, and what they'll be a big old mound of earth with a chamber inside, either one chamber or a hallway full of chambers on either side. Or you've got like Newgrange, which has like one long chamber, and then there's little shelves where they would put the bodies, kind of like an ossuary. That we're moving away from megalithic things, but it is still part of Neolithic culture, and
yeah, it is.
I kind of think, I'm not entirely certain. I know Newgrange is not a megalithic structure. It doesn't have any massive stones that I'm aware of, but it does have celestial alignment. So it is built as a tomb. So that is the, embrace of the mother after death. But its passageway, the hallway that leads out of it, opens on the sunrise on one of the solstices, winter solstice, maybe spring equinox. I don't remember. But yet again, another time measuring device, another thing associated with the celestial sphere. In this case, in the case of Newgrange, it's Maze How, not Newgrange. Maze How. I've been calling it the wrong thing this whole time. Maze How is the one I'm talking about. Newgrange is a different site altogether. Maze How is maybe a combination of the astral alignment and the embrace of the mother concepts.
And yeah, that kind of ties in with a lot of what we talked about on our last episode, especially with the mother gods and whatnot, and the earth being tied to the earth. And it's funny because a lot of our major religions nowadays still incorporate a return to the earth. We still to this day bury our dead, even though it makes absolutely no sense. Especially if you're just going to entomb them in a box that causes them to decay even slower, and necessarily negates the purpose of returning them to the earth, from dust to dust, ash to ash. You know, but a, a, a lot of cultures did do cremation and whatnot, and spreading ashes to the wind, which would then more incorporate into, like you'd said, with the father god. Obviously, a whole lot of those father gods had to do with storms, anger, violence. Lightning is associated with a lot of the ancient father gods.
Yeah, but also the zodiac procession as well. The sunrise through the various zodiac signs. That was big in Mesopotamia and I believe Greece as well. Uranus carries the hoop over his shoulder. The hoop is the circle of the zodiac signs. Or zodiac constellations, I guess, not signs.
So I think, what you're saying, and everything that we're saying about this, it could be seen as conjecture. But I think what you're pretty much saying is that these people didn't just align these stones for planting purposes. It wasn't just because, like, oh, well, it's a gigantic calendar. Well, they can tell by the weather and the climate around them changing what season it is. They don't need a gigantic stone.
Something that takes, hundreds of generations to build.
To
know when we need to plant.
That.
Yeah.
Like, oh, winter is, it's finishing up. They can tell it's warming up, so they don't need this.
Yeah.
They don't need to build these for that. So they obviously had some sort of organized religion already incorporated into their society that they were building these structures for. So I think you're right in saying that it's conjecture, but I also think you're right in saying that it's not at the same time. They weren't stupid. So they were doing this for a reason, and it wasn't just a calendar.
Yeah.
They had other ways to keep track of that.
You mentioned cremation. There was another type of burial, or I guess funerary practice that they did in the Neolithic that got married in with entombment in a burial mound, which was it's called like a sky burial. They put them up on a high post up in the air and let birds and wild animals and stuff eat on them, and then they collect the bones afterwards and put them in the inside of the tomb. So there's yet another combination of the sky element and the earth element together. There was another practice where they would do ritual exposure. They just leave the body out in the woods and let wild animals eat it and storms blow it apart and everything. And then they'd go basically on a quest to hunt down all the bones of this guy, and they'd bring him back the year after that and collect him up and put him all back together in his burial mound. Or her. There's pretty equally during the Neolithic. There's pretty equally him and her burials around. So it's not like they're just honoring their patriarchs or whatever you want to call it, like their male head of household. They also honor their women head of household too.
And what we were talking about before, I mean, this would be a much more advanced, much more peaceful civilization than we had ever encountered on the planet at any point in time. So therefore, they're going to revere women much higher than we probably even do even now today still. So, obviously women would have been seen and incorporated with the earth, with, mother nature, the mother of everything. You can't have anything without a woman. Granted, you can't without a man either, but, they see the creation of people coming from a woman. So the earth creates and nurtures us with what we need: crops, animals, the things that we take and use. And we see women providing us with offspring. You're bringing new people into the world through a woman, and I'm sure at that point in time they didn't understand how the birds and the bees worked. So it was like, okay, obviously this guy got with her and and a
They'd
few
have to
months
figure
later,
it out if the kids look
well,
the
I'm
same
sure
as the dude and as the mother, you know.
I'm sure they did, but they didn't understand the actual like biological process.
Maybe.
They just knew that if this guy and this woman got together, a few months would go by and she would produce a new person. And that is seen as probably a miracle of
Yeah.
the world at the time. I mean, you think about it, they didn't have modern, well, that we know of, modern medical outlook.
Yeah, you know,
So
you
they
might
weren't
be.
just like,
I had never thought about this line of reasoning, but you might be right. I mean, even if you think about the Old Testament, there's stories of like, oh, Sarah wouldn't give Abraham a son, as if she was just holding out on him. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
then there's like rules about you can put away your wife if she doesn't give you children and things like this. So yeah,
Yeah.
they
They
might
didn't
not have
know.
understood that the deed
They didn't
equals
know that
child.
genetically a man can only produce a man. So, or, you know, like for a woman not to be able to give birth to a son, that's not her fault. And they didn't understand that at the time. They didn't know genetics and how DNA and cell replication actually worked back in those days. So they just assumed the woman was at fault.
Yeah.
So then, like, and not only that, and once again, we come down to an entire change from the whole mother goddess culture with the rise of a lot of the Middle Eastern religions and portraying a woman as the downfall of man. And so we
Eve
get away
eats the
from the
apple,
whole,
yeah.
yeah. So they're the harbinger of harbinger.
Yeah.
Sorry, of yeah, original sin, of evil, of
Now,
just
that's
dooming people.
That's not all of the Middle East, because you do have like Inanna, I guess,
Well, I'm just talking about the
Sumerian
big
mother
three,
goddess.
pretty much.
But yeah.
Yeah,
But you do have at the close of the Neolithic, or near the close of the Neolithic, you have the Bronze Age coming on, starting slow with people cold hammering copper nuggets that they can find naturally, and then eventually, mining and smelting copper ore and all of that. But the people that seem to work copper and bronze came in with more of a violent culture. So
yeah.
they're often associated with like Proto-Indo-Europeans, but that's more of a language group than an actual culture. If you go look into the archaeological cultures of the time, none of them are like markedly Proto-Indo-European. I don't know how you would tell what language they speak, but there is a group of people coming in who work copper, work bronze, and they do have a more warrior-centered culture, which is more in line with knights in shining armor and Vikings and that sort of mentality. Obviously, they aren't Vikings, they aren't knights in shining armor, but they have that. We go into battle, and it's the lone knight traveling the world fighting monsters and blah blah blah. And these guys come in. They do notably still erect a few standing stones. They're called menhirs, which is like a really tiny monolith. It's small. They're under a ton.
Yeah.
So there's menhirs, and then they generally bury their dead in tumuli that are often called kurgans. Kurgan or tumulus would be a big mound of earth over a single person, not a family anymore, just one person. And it was generally reserved for a leader or a chief, because he's usually
Somebody highly revered.
he's usually buried with his chariot or his horses or his weapons, things like that. Oh yeah, and also these bronze working people did come in with the wheel for the first time into Europe. Now they also did not have writing, so we don't know much about their culture outside of archaeology, but they did really bring a close to this Neolithic era and a shift in focus, a shift in importance, to the point that you see some of these there's some interesting holdouts from the Neolithic during the early forays into metallurgy. There's a this is probably what fifth time I brought them up, but the Vinca culture in the Balkans, in southeastern Europe, they experimented with some copper working, and they found a furnace where they were heating the copper up with some remnants of, I don't remember if it was slag or copper itself, but this was before the Copper Age. They were innovating on their own, but they abandoned it, much like the Green Saharan cultural adventurers or cultural innovators tried out some new things and then ultimately abandoned them. These guys did as well. And then, of course, then the new group came in with copper work and this huge cultural complex which spanned almost the entire Balkan mountainous region. They slowly abandoned their own culture, their own traditions, and adopted that of the incoming copper and bronze workers.
Yeah, which, has always been what has happened all through time. Mm-hmm. This is the new innovations come in, out with the old. It's always been like that. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to me that you bring up the Bronze Age and the early Bronze Age people coming in and taking this over. So that leaves this kind of, there's going to be a transitional period. So you're going to have these people that are still building these henges and these mm-hmm. structures, but you're also going to have the more violent people turning into and taking over these areas as well and spreading their influence. Mm-hmm. And that actually brings me to here in North America, where there have been megalithic structures discovered here as well. And one of them is actually a fairly recent discovery from back in about, I want to say it was the early to mid thousands, mm-hmm. in Grand Traverse Bay in Lake Michigan. Now, these divers were looking for a shipwreck out there. And they were, swimming around on the bottom looking for the shipwreck. And they come across this stone, which looks like it has a carving of a woolly mammoth on it. Mm. And it is very clear that it is a woolly mammoth, but it looks very new to me. Mm-hmm. Just from the way I'm looking at it. But near this stone is a circle of stones, just like a henge of megalith stones. I know it's redundant, but whatever.
Huge proportions, like several tons?
Well, not huge, more easily manageable, but, still arranged in a circle, pretty good size. Nice. And it's been estimated that they were placed around about 9,000 years ago. And these are now on the bottom of Lake Michigan. Mm-hmm. And as I've presented before on the show, Lake Michigan's really not that old in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. It started to form when the glaciers started to recede around about 20,000 years ago, but really started to ramp up with filling around about 10 to 11,000 years ago. Okay. And by 3,000 years ago, it had reached its shape that it is now. So it had filled all the way up, all the Great Lakes, for that matter.
So 9,000 years ago, it was a pretty big lake, but it was nowhere near the size that it is today?
No. Nice. It would have been about almost 2/3 of the way full.
So then that would have all of that underwater, would it just been a nice big lakeside, plain? That's cool.
Yeah. And with the receding glaciers and the warming temperatures, it would have made for, and Michigan still is, an amazing place for agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
It rivals California with its production of a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's known for that, and a Neolithic civilization is speculated to have built this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is huge amounts of copper in Michigan. Michigan is well known for its copper mines and everything like that. But when the first European settlers came into the area, they noticed that a lot of the copper had already been mined.
Mm-hmm.
And these mines, they were old, they were ancient. And as we know, because we've never found any sort of metallurgy with any sort of Native American culture aside from anything that is just artistic. So like gold and stuff like that. But this copper was mined in such extensive amounts that they weren't just using it for artistic purposes. If they were using it to cover their homes or something with it, like plating and whatnot, we would have found evidence of that. So there is a speculation that a civilization came during the late Stone Age, early Bronze Age to North America to mine this copper. And while they were here, they built these monuments. The same monuments that were built in Europe in the same structure and everything like that. So that just decries that this is still the same civilization. Now, in New England, there's another one that's called America's Stonehenge. Now, this one is kind of more out there. This could be old, might not be. It's actually been dated to being around about 1000 AD or so. But there is evidence of
isn't that
radio.
roughly contemporaneous with Cahokia, 1000 AD?
Yeah, it would be around about the same time as that.
Okay.
But it was built in the ancient, Stonehenge style. These large rocks piled up. Now, the place was originally dubbed Mystery Hill. And a lot of people were just like, oh, yeah, well, this was pre-Columbian in origin. But turns out a lot of it was built by a man named William Goodwin. So, he created a lot of this Stonehenge. But there is evidence of people occupying that area for as long as 4,000 years. So we have that going on. Now, what they found at this American Stonehenge was Phoenician inscriptions on stones and things like that.
Yeah, that screams of hoax.
Yes, it does, but it also brings up the kind of that point. I was like, why would somebody hoax something that they have really no knowledge about? So the Phoenicians and whatnot would have been early Bronze Age civilization that arose from that point. They used a lot of copper. They would have come here to get that copper. Very likely that they would have done that. Copper from North America has been found in ancient sites in Europe and around the Mediterranean.
No way.
So there is evidence of that same copper because the copper in Michigan is almost pure.
Huh.
And nowhere else in the world is it that pure.
Huh.
So finding evidence of it out there shows that people did actually come to the upper peninsula of Michigan and to the northern lower peninsula of Michigan to mine this copper at some point in time. The mines are still there. You can still see them. Gigantic copper slabs are still just sitting on the ground up there. Just big chunks of ore still. They're still mining copper up there to this day. And it would only make sense that the Native Americans weren't doing it because we don't have any evidence of them really using it for anything other than artistic purposes. The amount of copper that was mined doesn't line up. So this civilization could have been even more advanced than what we're thinking.
Well, that
because
comes,
not only they're traveling across the world to get these things.
that goes back to Atlantis, because you said it was 10,000 years ago was the stone circle.
They estimate because of it being underwater, it makes it kind of hard for them to really get an accurate measurement because everything down there is just shifting. But they're estimating around about 9,000 years.
Okay, yeah, that is most definitely before the Phoenicians. So this is really interesting. I had not heard of this this copper connection before. I had heard that some people thought that Minoan, like Cretans, had come over to mine that copper and bring it back to the island of Crete back in the Minoan civilization. But I mean, that was fairly well debunked and kind of a silly proposition, because their boats wouldn't have made it across the Atlantic. No. But I mean, they're great boats. I'm not knocking if we have any Minoan listeners or listeners from Crete. I'm not knocking your boats.
I kind of doubt that, but yeah, I don't know.
But no, it wasn't a ocean going vessel that could survive an Atlantic crossing. But the idea that someone back further, we're talking more Atlantis type of time, coming over to mine those and build that monument, that is, I'll have to look into that. I know almost nothing about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy things going on here in North America. That
you said some of this
really
was pretty new.
Fit the bill.
You said,
yeah, this one they've only just discovered it probably within the past. Well, it's been in the past 2 decades at least. Mm-hmm. So it's fairly new. I mean, this mastodon carving. I mean, if somebody really wanted to go out of their way to hoax that, they would have had to dive down there and carve it.
Right.
So that, for one, makes no sense. Or they would have carved it onto the stone and then hucked it off the side of a boat, hoping that somebody was going to find it.
Right? Yeah.
That also makes absolutely no sense. So all of this kind of lends credence to me, because I don't think anybody's just going to go down there and, build this monument and then be like, all right, let's dive down there and look at it. It would take in massive amounts of work just to build it when the water wasn't there. Mm-hmm. So somebody would have noticed. Mm-hmm. So I tend to think that the Lake Michigan one is legit. Mm-hmm. And there is evidence of cultures going back a long way in that time anyway. I mean, like, we have the Clovis people of the Southwest going all the way up, almost as far back as 30,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. So the people have been in that area just as long as they have been everywhere else, pretty much.
I think that the 30,000 years ago was pre-Clovis people, but yeah, I mean, same basic idea.
I don't know the exact dates on that, but
same basic idea though. People were there like that far back,
and doing the same things as everywhere else.
Yeah, they even found a place somewhere on the west coast here, like BC or something maybe. They found a place where the archaeologists were like, yeah, no, if we had found this in like I don't know, southern France or Ukraine, we'd be like, yeah, totally a Neanderthal site or pre-human hominin site, maybe Homo ergaster or something like that, but or Homo heidelbergensis. But anyways, they said this is North America. None of the pre-human hominins made it here, so we don't even know what to do with this site. But it looks like a archaeological site that pre-human hominins were butchering and processing meat from a hunt. And it's just like the dates did not line up with people being there. So it's possible that people were there even earlier than the 30,000 year date.
which I think is another episode that we're going to have to do at some point in time, is just the Americas alone. There's so much human history here that doesn't get talked about. So we should probably touch on that on an episode in the future. But I think we're probably going to have to wrap this one up. So I'm going to get our closing thoughts in on this. I'm leaning towards the whole ancient civilization idea of a one unique people spread around a massive area, all doing the same thing in a peaceful nature. And then they were destroyed by some sort of cataclysm or, catastrophic event that caused them to, either be just dispersed or broken up, creating newer civilizations in smaller pockets. I kind of like that theory because, I mean, these monuments, these monoliths, and these megaliths out there all kind of speak to one group of people. They weren't just building the easiest way to build and stack stones. They were actually taking the time to intricately design these around what would either be seen as their religion or some sort of celestial intelligence that we didn't see until much, much later on. So I'm going with that there was a very large civilization that we have no idea even existed, and we have no idea who they even were, built these. So that's my theory. And
I'm going to drop my theory, which is not going to surprise many people. I think it might have been, or at least the most sense I can make of it in my mind is it was maybe a lowest common denominator that all the people could get together on and could come up with. So that would be why there's so much similarity with the circular structure with astral alignments and the mound structure with, Earth Mother's embrace kind of together in a single site. I'm going to go with kind of an animist axis mundi type theory, that this is a connection between the spirit world, or the world up above in the sky, and the world of dead souls under the ground, the underworld, something like that, where the two come together in our material world in between.
Yeah. I think neither one of us is wrong, and neither one of us is right.
And yep,
and we will never know.
We'll never be able to know whether it's right or not. I mean, we'll never be able to find out what is right.
We can get to that point in time when we reach that day that we can send you back in time. Like, we're never really gonna know. And unfortunately, I think once again we have not brought a close to a mystery. So, if anything, we've once again, proffered more questions than we have answers. But I don't know, that's the great thing about this world, is that we as human beings are inquisitive in nature, but we're always looking for an answer. And when we can't find an answer to something, it fascinates us even more. So here we are talking about these things now and discussing these things, which we will never have an answer for, yet we're always going to be fascinated by this mystery. And that, well, I don't know. That just kind of keeps me going every day. I don't know about everybody else out there, but man, I just like a good mystery. And by God, this is a big one. So, yeah.
And one would say a mega.
Yes, they would. I know, it's a giant. No, that joke's old now.
Oh, yeah, we didn't even touch on the theory that giants built all the megaliths.
Yeah, I didn't want to go into the whole like crazy theories on them and everything.
Yeah, that's true.
I kind of like where we stuck with it, keeping it like, okay, human civilizations did this. It makes more sense. Makes a whole lot more sense. than giants. I mean, we pretty much. I think actually our giant episode is probably the only one where we actually gave a definitive answer of what actually was going on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, this one we really don't have any answers. And on that note of not having any answers, well, I apologize everybody, but we've laid out all the groundwork once again, and you can take it however you may, and you can roll with it whatever you want to, because that's what it is. It's all speculation. Nobody's right and nobody's wrong. So when it comes down to this whole academia and science knowledge about this stuff, they're just guessing too. So, hey, here we are, and that's why we're here to discuss these things. So, yeah, and I think on that note, we'll go ahead and call this a show. And yeah, but yeah, thanks for joining us. If you haven't checked us out yet, we're on Instagram at Bermuda Boys Podcast. I think I don't remember exactly. You just type in Bermuda Boys on Instagram, you'll find us.
There's no other
yeah,
Bermuda Boys out there.
No, there definitely aren't. We got a one of a kind name there.
Yeah.
But other than that, that's really our only thing. We don't have a website or nothing, so can't find us there.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I'm Jack, and thanks for listening.
Good night, everyone.